Captain Picard. Priority 1 message from Starfleet coming in on secured channel.
My Readier Room.
Welcome to the Readier Room, the only and longest-running Star Trek Next Generation rewatch podcast. Every week we're coming at you live, pre-recorded, with on-the-set stories and hidden lore for you to enjoy. My name is Mitchell Mells, Chief Consultant of Services at Paramount, and with me is my life partner, Brandon Hobbs. How are we today, Brandon?
Wonderful, Mitch.
Wonderful? Well, I'm tooderful.
Oh, that's cute.
What's got you so wonderful?
Well, I'm excited to talk about the explosions and the gore and the laser fights.
Yes,
it's a hell of an episode this week.
Right, it's not a Saw movie. It's an episode of Star Trek Next Generation. Kind of wild.
Correct.
Kind of wild when you think about it. I'm also very excited to get to today's episode. So I got to blow through this question of the week from some nobody first, and then we can talk about it.
God, what a loser!
What a loser! So this week's question comes from Jorm in Sweden. Not quite sure how that's pronounced. Jorm says, I'm an aspiring actor in Sweden. Which is kind of a shitty place to aspire to act, but, whatever. He didn't say that. I editorialized that. Back to his words. All my life, I've wanted to act in high-budget science fiction shows like Star Trek. What advice can you give to someone like me? Eternally Readier, Jorm, or whatever. Oof. So, it's... these kind of questions are always a little disheartening to hear. That people have set their aim, their sights... the bar in life, that they've set it so low. Star Trek, any Star Trek, especially to the Next Generation, but really any of them, have always been like a dumping grounds or maybe a training grounds for low-level or beginning actors to, get some work and get some experience, but also not, it doesn't matter if they give a bad performance, because at Star Trek, we'll just take anything, right? I mean, look at the Next Generation. How many of those actors were just terrible?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It was everybody but Patrick Stewart, I guess, and even he was like... So, my advice to you is to not have this dream, is to change your dream. I mean, I'm sure Sweden needs, like, dentists, probably, or social workers.
Yeah.
Don't...
basically anything but this.
Right.
I think. Garbage Man.
Yeah, Garbage Man, that's a good one. School Board of Education member. Anything you want to do. Florist. Now, that can either be somebody who works with flowers or on floors. Both of them are very, very necessary. So, even in Sweden, meatball chef. Anything.
Oh, wow. Well, there's probably no shortage of those.
That's true. That's all they eat over there, after all.
That is I believe that's what Swedish children aspire to be, just generally speaking.
Right. Either that or cast members of low budget, low quality science fiction shows.
Right.
So, yeah, change your dream. God, don't go through with this. There's some success stories coming out of Trek, like Patrick Stewart went on to be in X-Men and Frakes went on to be in Beyond Belief, but they're few and far between. For every one of those, you have, like, what the hell is Gates McFadden doing these days? What is...
Well, I mean, even look at LeVar, who was fresh off of Reading Rainbow, one of the best shows of all time, and then he starts Trek, and it's like, oh man, it was all downhill.
Right. Well, Trek, you get known as the Trek guy, and once you're known as Trek, nobody in the industry will touch you. Barring some like incredible star power. So
it's embarrassing.
It is.
You can't having a Trek cast member on your show. You can't divorce the two.
It's the implications of that. It's like, oh,
Right.
my production has such a low budget that I could only hire this, or no good actors auditioned for, this role, so I needed to hire a Trek guy.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's like then you have to worry about who the audience for your show is going to be.
Right.
Are Trek fans going to migrate over to my show? Is a question that a lot of producers ask, and you never want that.
That because it taints the image.
Mm-hmm. Well, because what ends up happening is, before you know it, a wiki is made for your show. Detailing the in-universe world as if it were a real thing. People start sending you nasty letters about your canon.
People start cosplaying and practicing fictional languages.
Right. Yeah. So really, it's just it's a net negative for any show.
Yeah. Luckily, that's only for the camera-facing cast. If you're on the production side of things behind the camera, you're fine.
Oh yeah, that's very true.
There's that solidarity in the crew where everybody kind of knows that this is all a joke. I'm just doing this for my paycheck. I don't really need to. I don't respect this, and I don't need to. So
right, and I mean, at least I can say for us is we never had to do the convention circuit.
Thank God. Oh, could you imagine just sitting at a booth telling people it's $5 for a signature, and then nobody coming up to you because they don't think you're worth it?
Right.
We call that the Dorn life.
Oh, poor Mike. And it's the having to answer stupid questions as well, which
yes.
I guess we get our fair share on this show.
That's true. Like this week.
Yeah. But being up on stage and having to face a room full of these people, I think is kind of a different sort of situation, right?
Well, yeah, because you always need to have a certain amount of false enthusiasm. When somebody comes up and asks you, like, oh, what was it like working with the Ferengi Generation 2 costumes? And you forgot what the hell a Ferengi was 30 years ago, and you're just like, that's a good question.
Let alone the costumes that were probably sold off on eBay to some nerd in Germany or something.
Well, the guy who bought that comes dressed in the costume to ask about it.
That would make sense, wouldn't it?
Yeah. And then he do the grand reveal, and it's like, oh, I have that costume right here. And you can't just like tell them to fuck off because they pay you to attend these things, and you're just like, wow, you must be a big fan.
If there's one thing I've noticed, it's that nerds love to do the bait and switch.
They do.
They try to catch you on these things.
They do. It's because if they know more about the show than somebody who worked on it, that's the source of all their joy in life. Right,
definitely. And to us, it's of course we love it. We love TNG. We love our time on it, but
we also hate it.
Yeah, to a degree. I guess the point was that we were paid for it, and you are not.
Yes, and that you must always remember that fact when appraising the situation. I mean, do you think that we're doing this podcast free? I don't think so.
Right. Oh, speaking of which, Patreon,
please subscribe to our patreon.com/the Readier Room. If you join the $95 a month tier, you get a nice little postcard in the mail written by our secretary, and I hope you can enjoy that. So,
well,
that was a great question, Yorm. Please write back once you found a new dream in life, and maybe we'll give you some advice on that one too. If you are like Yorm and you have a great question you want us to answer on the show, you can email us at thereadierroom@gmail.com, DM us on Twitter at thereadierroom, and always preference is given to our Patreon patrons. So if your question's not getting through, consider subscribing to the Patreon, and then it just might. All right. So I feel like we kind of have a lot to talk about this week with this week's episode.
Really?
Well,
I feel like we don't have that much to talk about.
Well,
but...
maybe we'll meet in the middle and have an average amount of things to talk about.
We'll meet in the middle and have an hour-long episode.
Fantastic. So, Conspiracy is the name of this week's episode, and it's unique in that this episode was foreshadowed earlier in the season, which there is no inter-episode continuity, I believe, other than Yar dying, I suppose, but that's not like a plot thread. That's just
that was just a happy accident.
Yeah. So it was cool to see the characters from the last episode, Remick and the Admiral, show up again. And
it was very cool. It made the whole universe feel, a little bit bigger. I feel like it was kind of playing around with, going forward with the Next Generation. Seasons tend to end on two-parters,
Yeah.
We tend to get like a big conflict at the end. I feel like this was starting to play with that idea.
It
was. I mean, it wasn't a two-parter, but it easily could have been a two-parter had they, moved the episodes closer to each other in broadcast order.
Yeah, and we don't get that two-part cliffhanger between seasons 1 and 2, but I believe we do in seasons 2 and 3. Or maybe it's 3 and 4. But you're right, it does. It's the earliest incarnation of that idea. And I like it, but the biggest, not the biggest, but the most immediate thing that jumps out to me is that when you make this first story that branches between two episodes, it feels a lot bigger. And because it feels a lot bigger, it feels like it should be the season finale, except it's the penultimate episode.
Right. Which does feel a little weird. I mean, and we will get into exactly how this episode kind of leaves us, which is also weird considering that it's not the final episode of the season. But we'll cross that bridge when we get to it, I suppose.
Yes. To talk broadly about this episode, I liked it. I think that I guess I would describe it as having pacing issues, but I did like it overall.
Yeah. I think the episode is decidedly not Trek in its presentation. It was interesting, and I actually enjoyed it more than I did, 20 years ago watching this. I felt like it...
30 years ago.
30 years ago. Time is a flat circle, Mitch.
Time is a flat circle.
What was I saying? So I feel like it's a little bit jarring in its presentation, but watching it again now, it doesn't feel like it entirely kind of doesn't fit, with the rest of the season or with Trek as a whole. It's just a little bit of a change of pace, I guess. Yeah. Which it's good that we didn't really continue down this lane, but it's nice to have.
I don't think it's jarringly different or anything in any aspect except maybe the effects used. It fits pretty well enough into this first season. There's exactly one moment where I felt surprised and thought, this is Trek, right? But it was like a 3-second shot, and aside from that, it didn't rub me the wrong way or anything. And the elements that were different in a good way. So I really have no complaints about any of that. So here's the thing. I think that typically Star Trek and feelings of paranoia go very well together.
Definitely.
Star Trek is at its best when it's more human drama, emotional drama.
Yeah.
Sensibly, I should say, not melodrama. But when you have a smartly written scene of paranoia, especially with a science fiction bent to it, it's a great excuse to have all these character moments and smaller moments that are Trek's strengths. And, sometimes it's followed up by a stupid phaser fight, and, you can't really do anything about that.
I absolutely agree with that. I think this episode really started off strong. I mean, not with the dumb fish out of water jokes.
No, those were terrible.
I didn't hate that scene so much. It was a better incarnation of what we've gotten so many times over this season, I think.
Yeah, but it's like, why are we sharpening this tool? Like, why do we keep coming back to this well?
Right, well, not only do we come back to it at the beginning of this episode, we come back to it, maybe 15, 20 minutes later.
With the computer?
With the computer, which I guess we should just talk about it.
Yeah, that's in the running for the worst Trek moment of all time.
Honestly, it is. So the computer, I have this in my notes, says, please repeat request, like it's an Alexa.
Right.
Which I found offensive just to begin with. And then it seems to go on to possess sentience as it talks to Data. So it's kind of like, which is it? Is it a computer that is entirely utilitarian, or does it have a consciousness?
Well, there's that inconsistency, but also the fact that the way it shows sentience is by shutting Data down when he rambles, the same way that every other member of the cast does. And it's like, it's at this point that it occurred to me that's like they wanted this to be a running joke. Like,
right. Yes. Exactly. That is exactly my thought as well. It only occurred to me then that, oh, this is where it all culminates for this dumb little slapstick joke.
It's so dumb. Like, imagine a moment ago where I'm like, yeah, the best part of this series are the intense feelings of paranoia and those dark moments. And then, like, 2 minutes later, we're talking about this terrible, terrible joke that makes no logical sense.
Yeah, it's very bad, and I'm going to be interested to see, once we get into season 2, how much of this carries over.
You got to keep your eye on the ball.
Because I don't recall, across all of the good Star Trek episodes that everyone talks about, I don't recall there ever being a scene like this where they tell Data to shut up.
Right. They have, like, Data jokes.
Right.
But they also take Data's misunderstandings in a more philosophical way.
Yeah.
Where he's just actually learning something, and, maybe through the portal of that learning, there's a new perspective or something. It doesn't always work, but it's played a little more straight. And with this, Data doesn't actually learn anything. He's not increasing his understanding of humanity or customs. He's just rambling. He says this, like, the same thing over and over again. People tell him, okay, got it, Data, thank you.
Yeah, no, it's just it's low-hanging fruit, and for a show that kind of espouses this ideal of all beings being equal, right? The android seems to get a lot of flack.
Yeah. I mentioned this scene before several episodes ago. It's the one where Data's, like, staring at a kettle and measuring when it boils.
Right.
And the way that scene plays out, like, nobody's like, oh, Data, he doesn't actually make it boil longer.
Right. They don't, like, smirk directly at the camera.
Right. He's like, oh, I'm... because Data, what he's measuring there is his perception of the time. And he's like, oh,
right.
Humans perceive time differently than I... And it's, it's just written a little more smartly than anything in season 1.
Yeah. And, I guess we've kind of beaten this horse a lot.
Yeah, well, they've made this joke a lot.
Right, they just keep bringing it up. It's so hard to not talk about, because in this episode especially, it was just so offensive. Just everything about that scene was so bad. However, when the episode actually does start to get going, when Picard views the message, right, from his friend there, the Admiral, right? I thought that was a very compelling introduction to the episode.
Yeah.
I wanted to know more. Dennis McCarthy's score was great, super fitting. And
yeah, McCarthyism
I think
really improved this episode.
It did. Yeah, we don't joke about that, Mitch.
I'm sorry. But I agree with you.
The episode delivered on all that too, which is nice.
That first third, half maybe, of it was consistently incredibly interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I loved that introduction to it. I really liked the scene down on the Red Planet and the mining facility.
Right.
The destruction of the Horatio afterwards was also like an interesting story beat, and one that was like fully explained and paid off later on. Which
yeah, and not only that, but kind of I didn't see it coming, really.
Yeah, it was a lot of good writing. I think that the moment it shows a little bit of pacing issues is when the Admiral from the last episode, he's going to come onto the ship, and up until this point, and Picard's calling the board of 3 admirals down on the planet, you know, you're feeling, all right, who's a good guy, who's a bad guy, I don't really know, and you're like, oh, I can probably trust this guy because he was the one that was alerting Picard of the problem earlier. But then it just instantly cuts to him with this weird alien parasite, and you're like, okay, well,
Yeah.
I guess he's a bad guy, because
Right.
it was comedic in a way. In my notes, I wrote like, oh, I love the sense of paranoia in this episode, and then it cuts to that, and I'm like, well, I guess that's gone.
Right. You have it like an unambiguous, I would say, 10 minutes of walking around the ship, knowing something bad is going to happen, and then watching an old man comically fight Frakes,
True.
whose stunt double you can see very clearly in the finished episode as well.
It's I didn't realize that. It's a really funny scene. It's like, because, you know, when you have an old man actor, you can't ask them to do very intricate stunts or move very quickly at all, or even stand up for all that long of a time. And
Right.
We tried to use this to our advantage. I don't know if you've ever watched the original series or if you're aware of this.
No, what do I look like to you, Mitch?
Right. Well, I've seen some clips on YouTube that my children have showed me, but they're like, Dad, you really worked for this show? And I'm like, no, not that show, the other one. It was also bad, but the other one.
Not that old loser one. Are you kidding me?
Anyway, there's this scene where Kirk, who's played by William Shatner, who's an actor, is fighting this lizard thing. It's like a guy in a bad lizard costume. And I don't know if like the lizard costume guy like couldn't see, or if it didn't have a lot of mobility, but he can barely move around. He's moving very slowly, and Shatner it's supposed to be an even fight, so he's also acting in a very slow fight. It's a very awkward fight scene, and it kind of became infamous because of how ridiculous it was. So we're like, oh, okay, well, we have all these constraints placed on us by the actors in this fight scene. Why don't we play that up and try to make it this homage to that old one? Now, that scene had a very memorable score to it, which we couldn't get the rights to, unfortunately. And without the music, parts of the reference were lost that some people just didn't get it, and they're like, oh, you know, this is stupid. Why is Frakes fighting an old man? All this stuff.
Right.
But once you know the intent behind it, if you go back and watch it again, and if you haven't, go watch that original scene, you'll see the similarities to them. Like, a lot of the moves that they do, the fighting moves, are the same. It's really quite a love letter that was held back by legal constraints.
That's super interesting, Mitch. I had no idea. And to be honest, it fell flat for me. But I'll go back. You know what I'll do? I'll go back and I'll load up the music
Hmm.
in the original episode and just kind of play them right next to each other.
It's almost a shot-for-shot remake of the fight.
Huh. Wow.
Yeah.
And see, had that kind of gone over a little bit differently, this episode might be remembered more fondly.
How is this episode remembered?
Maybe we should have had the aliens turn them into lizard people. When they got infected, that could have been something.
Yeah, but that's a lot of costumes.
Right. Yeah, our budget had been kind of hurting for a while.
Well, we could have reused
after all of the expenses.
We could have reused those lizard costumes from that episode with the lizard and the dog people.
Yeah, I know, but you remember, by then they'd kind of melted.
Oh, right.
And they smelled weird, too, so...
Well, everything on the set smelled weird.
Well, Denise was gone, so it's...
It's true, but, you got to deep clean stuff to get it out.
Yeah, it was a weird scene, and I guess it was just kind of to give everyone else something to do. I have in my notes that Crusher was hot in that scene.
When she comes in with a phaser?
Yeah, and she's got like one hand in her pocket.
Right.
Yeah.
Who knows what she's doing in there?
Right. Yeah, I was really into that.
I question the in-universe purpose of that scene. So, the Admiral boards the ship with this parasite with the intent on giving it to Crusher, which I also don't quite get, but sure. I guess because she's the one who would be investigating this. So, okay. Alright, I get that. But when he's alone with Riker, unprovoked, he takes the opportunity to attack Riker. And
right.
Under what goal, I'm not quite sure, but he knocks him out. He knocks out Riker, and he does not take the chance to make Riker into one of those, into the parasite guy. So, at that point, why even attack him? Well, why? Riker was not threatening the guy. Riker didn't let on that he was suspicious either.
Well, maybe the alien's just really smart.
They did say as much.
Right. And if they told us that, then we have no choice but to believe it.
So I found that strange, and you're right, giving people something to do sounds like a big motivation for a lot of this.
Yeah, I mean, that's really all it is. Needed to fill some time. Needed to give the other cast members something to do. That's really it.
It does set up the conclusion where, by leaving out a lot of information, where Riker is suspected by the audience of being a parasite guy. And let's talk about this horror movie shot. I don't know if you know what I'm referring to, but there's...
Well, go ahead. Yeah.
Where Riker is... I'm sorry, Crusher's talking to Picard through the communicator. She's in sickbay, and Picard's down on the planet in the midst of the enemy. And then he's like, oh, I gotta go eat these bugs. And then it cuts back to Crusher, and then Riker comes up from behind and puts his hand on her shoulder. There's a musical sting.
Oh, that's right, yes.
And then it cuts.
Yeah.
It was fine. I don't mind that shot, or that edit, but it was very, very horror movie in its style.
It was horror movie, and I don't know, it felt a little bit random.
It did.
Because all of the tension is immediately expelled within 0.5 seconds.
I also think that the timing of it wasn't quite perfect, where it lingered a fraction of a second too long, where if you want that kind of jump scare feel almost, you cut it just a hair faster, frames faster.
Yeah. No, we had a lot of horror stuff in this, really. I mean, a lot of body horror, a lot of gross kind of scenes.
Yeah. Where to even begin?
I know, it is obviously what makes this episode particularly interesting. Not only because of the content, but because of the The props and the effects that were used, the makeup that was used. It was all pretty top notch, I think.
It was like the little tendrils coming out of people's necks. Those looks pretty cool. The climax with that entity was
right.
Probably the best effect in the series so far.
Right. Yeah, where to even begin? So, I guess most of this really starts out when Picard gets down to the Federation building, which I have to say I also really like that set.
Yes, I do too. I liked the little insignia plastered around in like subtle places.
Yeah, it's got this kind of like combination of, I guess, like sterility, but also sort of like a regal look to it.
Right, which
that really meshes well as like a futuristic set.
It's what you would expect of an official base, I suppose, of
right.
The top brass. Right, it doesn't have the grunginess of a more infantry focused location, but it's it's quite good.
Right. And I mean, I guess it's kind of really just an extension of the design philosophy of the Enterprise's bridge, which I also love. So I mean, if you love one, you love the other.
Do you think so? I don't get the same vibe from the two of those.
Do you not? I think you're just being contrarian.
I would never, first of all.
No, I think the Enterprise D and the Federation building both kind of have the same sort of look to them.
Oh, the Enterprise D.
Yeah. Or were you thinking of the C?
Sorry, I can't even get that out.
I see.
Ooh. I see. Anyway.
Yeah. So, all this horror stuff really starts to come to a head once Picard goes down, and the admirals invite him to dinner.
Right, where they have their latest My Boom, which is a bunch of mealworms.
Yeah, you expect it to be, like wine, maybe some nondescript meat and vegetables or something, whatever people eat in Star Trek.
Well, they don't eat meat.
Right. It's fake meat. They would have a plate of Beyond Meat.
Right.
And you would think that no real attention would be called to kind of the dressing of the scene, being that being the food and stuff. However, no, we're treated to mealworms in a bowl.
Right, live mealworms,
which
wiggling
is
around.
Horribly kind of unfitting, I think, for a scene in Star Trek, and there's a reason for that. So the mealworms were the brainchild of Ray, the head admiral in this episode, because he'd just come back from this retreat in Indonesia or something before filming, and he'd go on and on about the disgusting culinary habits of, and I'm using his words, of course, the disgusting culinary habits of the quote lesser Asians, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he thought this scene would offer some kind of shock value, right, to the audience, and I mean, I guess it did. But even worse, and I think I can speak for you and the rest of the crew when I say that we were all just completely dismayed when he unscrewed the top of that jar, and with that trademark shit-eating grin of his, he just like starts scooping the worms into his mouth, right?
Yeah, I don't know.
With his bare hands.
I don't know if this was his way of pulling a prank, his style of method acting, or just his way of getting a free lunch.
Right. And we'll never truly know, because this was just so psychotic. He was completely dropped from ever being in another episode again. But Gary and Henry, to the right of him in that scene, God bless him, they thought they were fakes, the mealworms. They thought they were fakes, and they just went along with it. And Patrick is just sitting there with that look of disgust on his face, and it's completely genuine.
Mm-hmm.
I think we all kind of were making that face at the same time. But the good news is it only took one take.
if you listen closely, when he first starts eating the worms, you can faintly hear one of the crew offset just say, "Oh my god!" And we tried to mix it out best we could, but there's still
Right,
a
right.
faint trace of it there.
You may have to use headphones, but yeah, it's there. Yeah, the mealworm scene is just, to me, feels extremely try hard. Don't you think?
I'm of two minds on it. I think that going and including the shots of them eating them is a little bit unnecessary, a little bit just like gross out horror. But I do like that style of reveal. Where up until then, you suspect things and Picard suspects things, but it's not quite laid out on the table just yet. And having that be the moment where it tips over the edge, I thought was a good choice. And
I think you're right about that. Yeah.
And I did like there's that moment where the question's hanging in the air, where is Picard gonna also eat these as an attempt to blend in with them, which
right.
I thought was like also unsettling enough in a satisfying way. Now I could deal without just like they're eating the worms. Oh my god. But I do think that the idea to use mealworms had some value to it.
The thing is, to me, it raises so many questions. Like, how long have these parasites had a taste for mealworms? Where are they sourcing them? Have they been on Earth long enough to have found mealworms and eaten them and said, "Hey, we love these. Let's get a big barrel of them for the Federation building, right?" And maybe that just bothers me more than it does you.
Yeah, it does. It does. Now, part of me is thinking, like, all right, I know the size of these parasites. How would they have developed? How would they eat these mealworms, which are like, an eighth of their body size?
Right.
It's interesting, but
yeah, I'm not really. I think it would have been better had we used, some kind of generic alien slug type prop or something.
Yeah, but part of what works about using the mealworms is that they're identifiable. They're instantly identifiable. And
That's what I don't like about them, though. That's the problem for me.
The more you spend as the audience thinking about like what are these things, the less effective the scene is. I believe.
Sure. I wasn't really there for the shock horror of it. But I think we're gonna have to agree to disagree on that scene. I think you're correct that the way it kind of confirms your suspicions is very good and written very well. But yeah, I'm just not a big fan of the mealworms.
So you wouldn't eat the mealworms?
I actually have eaten mealworms before.
As a meal?
Mm-hmm. No, ironically not. No, as a snack. They were more like snack worms. Gotcha.
Mm-hmm. See, I've only eaten gummy worms.
Right.
Also tapeworms when I wanted to lose weight, but...
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a great strategy, actually. The mealworms are surprisingly good, honestly.
I know.
In the future, when we are eating the bugs, those are going to be considered, I think, kind of the chicken. You know what I mean?
They're the other white meat.
Right. The other white meat, if you will.
I will.
Yeah. So, we go from there to, we have to talk about Riker's feint, where he brings the worms up to his mouth and then very awkwardly just pulls out his gun. So awkwardly, in fact, that he didn't even need to feint the eating of the bugs because it was obvious either way that he was pulling out a gun.
Right, there was kind of the same thing with the scene with him fighting the Admiral, where the physical acting is just so stilted, slow, and awkward.
Yeah.
And you can shoot these things in such a way to to hide that, right? Not emphasize it.
Right.
But unfortunately, neither side really nailed it on that one. So it's like, all right.
Yeah, in this particular scene, editing really dropped the ball for sure. The time it takes Riker to raise his gun really bothered me for some reason.
At least Frakes didn't have to eat the worms.
That's true. That's true. We had already kind of resolved that issue by the time we shot that scene. And then so who gets killed here? Do people get killed, or do they just extract the parasites?
I believe what happens is one person gets killed, and because that person was holding the host, all the other parasites just die.
Really?
Because Crusher says you have to set your phaser to kill, however, which he does with the Admiral. The Admiral is said to make a full recovery. So, when they're using their phasers on everybody in that building, none of them are dying.
Oh, okay. Okay. Sure.
Except the one guy who we set up to be a big meanie. He can die.
Yeah, so the return of Remick, huh?
Based Remick.
And he gets to host 2 parasites, I guess?
Yeah.
Because the Queen kind of crawls out of the Admiral and goes to him in a stunning display of stop motion animation.
Right. Now, we might have to explain what stop motion animation is for some of the people at home.
Yeah, let's do that.
Because it sounds like an oxymoron to have stop and motion, which I kind of get. So stop motion animation is when you take a picture of something and that will act as one frame of your final animation. Then you rearrange whatever you're taking a picture of, and you take a second picture, and that's the next frame. And you do this process over and over until you have an entire animation by stitching all those frames together. It's a very difficult, painstaking process, and you need to have very subtle movements between each frame, otherwise it won't look right. So if anything can throw it off, and you kind of have to start all over. And that's, of course, what happened on the set. Frakes knew that well, and he thought it'd be a fun little prank to come up on the stop motion artists and kind of move their props around while their back was turned, basically. And they'd find out and they'd question it, and Frakes would be like, "Whoops," and just nonchalantly walk away until an hour later, where he'd come back to do it again.
Yep.
Basically doubled the entire length of the shoot.
Oh yeah, that was hell. I mean, even Youngblood got in on it.
They were hanging out together, those two.
Yeah. As they were both Riker, of course.
Right.
You are on the set of TNG. It was kind of like a big brother little brother system that was imposed upon the cast, where they were expected to spend a certain quota of time with their stunt double.
Right.
To kind of line up their mannerisms and stuff.
Exactly.
Like that.
Exactly.
So you would have you would have like Doran taking his stunt double out for ice cream or McDonald's or stuff like that. Just kind of hanging out.
I remember Denise and her stunt double would hang out like under the bridge where her stunt double lived.
Right. Yeah. We didn't even talk about that, but yes, with having gotten rid of Denise, we were then finally able to free ourselves from that particular stunt double, who I will not name.
No. But everybody falls on hard times, so
yeah.
You want to hang around on set like 8 hours extra just to have some food to eat. Like, I get it. Not happy about it, but I get it.
Right. It's kind of, it is what it is. But unfortunately for Youngblood, his big brother was Frakes, so.
I wish my big brother was Frakes.
Yeah, I mean, he does have that big brother energy,
Right, and he becomes a bigger brother later on in the series.
A much bigger brother. Yeah, so I really enjoyed that stop motion.
As did I.
It's very cool.
It goes a long way in making the alien parasites seem even weirder. And
yeah,
had it been done with what would be CG these days, I don't think it would be nearly as is interesting to look at, nor as creepy.
No, for sure. It hits that uncanny valley just right.
I think all
It really
stop
does.
motion does in a sense.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's definitely true.
And then all that
But-
stop motion culminates in an insane effect.
Probably easily one of the craziest scenes in the entire show. And why it's so remembered, I think, is, I mean, there's so many aspects to this scene, right? You have the stop motion, and then it crawls up to Remek's shoulder, and he turns to it and opens his mouth, and it goes in. I mean, God, you remember how many takes it took to get that thing down Robert's throat?
Right, because he had to be perfectly still for the entire thing with the stop motion. And he just kept gagging on it, and
Yeah. Like, so we had a guy obviously kind of just outside the frame pushing it down his throat, and we picked the character of Remek to be in the scene precisely because we thought Robert would be very good at getting this down his throat in one take.
right.
But that was not the case. Like you said, he kept gagging on it well before it was even halfway down his throat, and we had take after take of the cleanup crew having to come in and just wipe off the blood, puke, and tears from not only the set but from Robert himself.
I think it was LeVar who took him aside and gave him some advice on how to get it down his throat.
Was that who it was?
I believe so.
Well, someone definitely had an effect, because at some point, we were making no headway, and then he finally got it, went right down his throat, and reportedly he didn't even have any problems with it coming out the other end the next day. So at least he was good at something.
Right, which is amazing because of all the sharp edges on it.
I know.
Good for him.
And then so it goes down his throat, and
Then we have the effect of his throat, his neck kind of like bulging.
Oh yeah, that was the prop director blowing into some kind of device that was like the prop itself was obviously wrapped around Robert's neck, and he was blowing into it to kind of simulate it bulging out. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it looks great.
Yeah, it did look good. That took another God knows how many takes.
Yeah, he was pretty lightheaded by the end of it, all the blowing.
He absolutely was.
But really, all of this is a preamble to the final effects shot. Where and there's two of them. One of them is the explosion of Remek's head. And we didn't really use his head to explode. We used a prop.
Right.
But
which is something that a lot of people miss.
Right. They always reply with fan mail like, "Oh, R.I.P. This actor." Forget his name.
Right.
Might as well be dead. And no, we didn't kill him. But yeah, it's amazing because there's like a 1-2 second shot of the head exploding, and you're like, "Wow, what am I watching Star Trek?" It's
right.
Amazing.
The face melts off.
Yeah, because they're firing their phasers at it, which they had done the whole episode to no effect. But now he's done.
Now it works.
Yeah,
it's extremely grotesque.
It is, and it's shocking to think that this was on primetime television.
Yeah, I mean it. There was a lot of back and forth in production about whether we should air it like this.
Luckily, we did.
Obviously, luckily we did. Yes, it came out like just the absolute shock of seeing this scene for the first time on TV. Just there's really nothing else you can compare it to in this show.
A lot of parents wrote in like, "Oh, you gave my child nightmares. How dare you?" And we tasked some intern on replying back like, "Good, they shouldn't be watching Star Trek. Have them play baseball or something."
Right? Yeah. Anything.
Not Trek.
Damn.
Which says a lot because the kids who stuck with it and became the weird ones ultimately makes a lot of sense. When they're like, "Oh yeah, I see this guy's head exploding. This is what I want to watch." Is my 9-year-old self, and it's like, "Oh, what do you mean this kid grew up and became a shut-in weirdo?" Like, wow, who would have thought?
And then before you know it, you're kind of just like, doing the convention tour just to see a glimpse of this actor or that actor from your dumb little science fiction show from 30 years ago.
Exactly.
But anyway, yeah, so his head explodes, and then the alien comes out of it.
Right, it's not even the final effect.
Which the mother alien, the mother parasite, was very cool looking as well. I loved
Right,
it.
it's
was
like
very Predator-esque / alien xenomorph-esque, right?
It's sitting there in his exposed chest cavity of like his exploded corpse.
It's so disgusting.
Right, you're like, all right, this guy's head exploded. That's it, right? No, there's more.
And, mind you, this thing is fucking wailing in pain, just screaming as it gets shot with this phaser fire.
Right, and the Federation officers, of course, in their usual form, they're like, fucking kill it! Kill it!
Just an overall extremely painful scene for everyone involved. Oh, man.
It's kind of awesome, though.
It was. I remember the first time I actually saw it, I couldn't help but laugh out loud just because of how surprised I was.
Right. It is shocking in a number of ways. And
it truly is.
But it's good. It's good. So the ending right there. And hold on, before that, when they go into the room to confront Remick and he like swivels around in some space chair while he's like managing a map of the galaxy, is also wonderfully ridiculous, where it's like a James Bond villain just in his lair.
But it's Remick.
Yeah.
Right. Although I guess it does kind of work a little bit better than we're giving it credit for, given that we've spent the entire episode dealing with this sort of paranoia that you've been talking about. So, anyone could really be anyone at this point, right?
Right. And
but it is funny to see Remick in that chair.
It is. Normally, I think a lot of the action stuff's pretty hokey, and it is. But I do like this more kinetic, cathartic payoff for the emotional paranoia. If you excised that like middle part of the episode with the Admiral on the Enterprise, I think this episode would be like a 9 or a 10. Like it'd be really good. With that, it's still good, but it suffers, and it's more like a 7 or an 8. But overall, just a pretty strong episode, I think.
Yeah, I mean, so on its own, just as a piece of media, out there in the world, it's great.
Yeah,
like the production's great. Everything about it is interesting and fun and well done, and I think a lot of people's enjoyment of the episode does kind of hinge on is it Star Trek?
Who cares?
I guess that was kind of where I was going with it. Is who really does care? I've definitely come around on it this time more than any. It was just so much fun. So I would say it's definitely up there in terms of season 1 episodes, and actually it kind of stands on its own, compared to the rest of the series as well.
It does.
You're not going to get anything like this again, and it's done so well.
That's the thing. When you talk about is something Trek or not, really how well is it done is the more important question. So, for example, I think it was last week's episode with the time stuff, and we talked about how boring that was. A lot of that was Trek. That was Star Trek, but it was just boring in its execution. Maybe this is not Star Trek, but it's certainly a lot more compelling.
Sure, and we also have to remember that so much of what is quote-unquote Trek is, we started getting better and better episodes as we freed ourselves from the shackles of Gene's insane requirements. Yeah, so it's like, is later TNG even Trek at all at that point? And I mean, so I guess this kind of leads into a question for you,
okay,
or for both of us maybe, because I mean, the story for this episode, it was originally pitched as a conflict between two Federation factions. One kind of in the shadows of the Federation, right? Right.
Yes.
But Gene being Gene, he had trouble grasping the idea that colleagues could disagree with each other. So we added aliens to it, of course. Do you think that this episode could have been as good without the aliens, without the parasites?
I think a core part of what makes this episode good is the paranoia, and I have trouble conceptualizing that kind of paranoia where you can't be sure of somebody's intentions just by looking at them.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, if there's like these two factions inside the Federation, it's more cut and dry. It's more obvious on who's on what side.
Mm-hmm.
But also the fact that when you're just having Federation officers squaring off against one another, they're not going to be capable of something as unsettling or nefarious as assuming somebody's identity.
Right.
And that's part of why this episode, parts of it rather, are as what's the word I'm looking for? I guess creepy as they are, is because of that sense of loss of identity, which is a core fear of many people, and I think of innately within humans.
Yeah, and also the the body horror. I think
yes, that's certainly wouldn't have been
terrifying.
There.
Yeah, and so we also wouldn't have gotten that amazing final scene.
Yeah,
if not for the parasite. So yeah, I think that's a great way to wrap that kind of question up. Is I think they made the right decision as well. And sometimes Gene's weird, stupid ideas can actually be for the benefit of everyone.
Well, a broken clock is right twice a day.
But if you're gonna sit here and ask yourself, is this Trek? Well, there you go. There's a very obvious aspect of it that is quite Trek, which is that we changed it in order to suit Gene's sort of need for not having any kind of conflict between colleagues, I guess, between different people in the Federation,
right? And
it worked out for the better. So
the extreme better.
Yeah,
good episode.
Yeah, solid episode. I think it's definitely worth a watch.
I guess that'll do it for our talk on this episode.
I think that's it. Yeah. I don't have the most exciting question for you today, Mitch.
All right, I'll take a lukewarm question. I'll take a softball.
Because it was the only thing I could really think of, because I'm trying to relate them to the episodes,
Right.
So, I guess what I'll ask is, we get through this episode and there's kind of a cliffhanger that never gets resolved, right?
Oh, right. We didn't even talk about that. Yes.
We didn't. And I guess maybe we should actually just talk about that first.
Yeah, let's get in on that. So at the end of the episode, they're like, Remick was sending out a beacon, a homing beacon to Earth.
Right.
And is he calling in more parasite reinforcements? Never talked about again. Not this season, not next season, never. I
want to say that it had something to do with originally was going to be a Borg connection.
That's
thing, or
exactly what I was.
Borg.
I was just gonna say that.
I stole your point.
You did. The Borg eat up a lot of space that this threat is trying to occupy, where it's like a distant, unexplored region of space. A threat coming from that to Earth. The Borg do exactly that, and the Borg also. Now that I'm thinking about it, they have the exact same thing of assuming people's identities, of taking over people in that way, and they have the same kind of hive mind that an insect would do. They also have a queen. Are the Borg just these things again? A reimagining of them?
I think they might be, because we were. Throughout season 1, we were trying to build up who would be the main antagonist really throughout the series, right? We had the Ferengi,
right?
And then of course we had these guys, which the parasite thing. I mean, it's kind of an unprecedented conflict in Star Trek, where there's this grand conspiracy, and these things can kind of just destroy the fabric of society so easily, So, and then of course we get the cliffhanger. I just think as the idea for the big bad guy of the series evolved to the point that it became the Borg as we know them, we couldn't really fit the two together. You know, the parasites and the Borg, so it ended up just being out of necessity. We had to drop them.
Yeah, which I'm fine with. I don't think you really need to have both of these things.
No.
It basically, at the end of the day, is it cheaper to have stop motion or to glue a bunch of tubes on the people?
Paint them white.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I like the Borg more.
Same.
I think so. It all worked out, but yeah. So we do end on that cliffhanger, and the plot thread never gets resolved in the Next Generation. However, the parasites do appear again, and my question for you is: under cover of which Star Trek title do they appear, and what form of media is it?
Good lord. I don't think it's the Explore the Enterprise VR game.
I don't think so either.
Nor do I think it's Star Trek Picard. But the fact that you're asking like what type of media is it makes me think that it's some novel. And really, where else would it appear other than a novel? Or maybe like a sound novel. So, if you're asking me the title of it, it has to be like something a little more general that is conceivable to guess.
Well, so it's not the title per se. It's you know, which Star Trek series. You know,
Oh,
you have the original series. You have
gotcha.
TNG.
So, for example, like a TNG novel would be an answer.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Okay, in that case, it's a little easier. I'm gonna say a Voyager. Voyager. I'm going between novel and comic book. I'm gonna say
Smart.
a Voyager comic book.
Well, that's a good guess. It was actually a Deep Space Nine series of novels.
A series of novels, huh?
A series of novels, which I wouldn't have expected you to say. A novel would have been fine. Yeah, it's a series of Deep Space Nine novels where it turns out they're actually bioweapons or something.
Oh, okay. Despite their sentience.
Right. I don't know. I didn't really read enough of the Wikipedia article, but I just thought that was funny.
Did they complete Cisco?
I'm sorry?
Did they take over Cisco?
Did you say did they complete Cisco?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Did they, assume his identity? Did they bring him to the fold?
No, I don't think so. It says Christopher Pike is involved. I don't know how.
Like the guy who made the original Turnpike?
No. The other Christopher Pike from Star Trek. The guy who ends up in the wheelchair. You know what I mean?
The director.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. They all assume the name of Christopher Pike when they're in the wheelchair.
It's more of the chair that's the director.
It truly is. So many happy accidents.
Yes.
But yeah, anyway, I guess that's it.
That'll do it for this episode of the Readier Room. Make sure that you're checking in every week and checking to see if either Brandon or myself have been taken over by bioweapon parasites. And if we're not readier, you'll know it's not us. And if you're not readier, we'll know it's not you. So please, everybody, until our next episode, stay ready.
The troublesome little man-child.
Consider that in the history of many worlds, there have always been disposable creatures.
Do you consider yourself superior to us?
Should have told him to mind his own damn business.
But I stroked the beard thusly. Do I not appear more intellectual?
Computer! Freeze program.
promising beginning.